Right, little things are big things, and I've heard that throughout this afternoon that I've been there. And what does it mean? And little things to some really mean a lot, and they can mean something big, can't they? Which has very much been alluded to. So I'm trying to carry on with the theme to a certain degree. And yes, my name's Jan Burns, and I do have an MBA, and it was through my bloody effort that I got it. So I'm chair of the National Dignity Council, and it would be absolutely lovely if I could find out if you have ever heard of the National Dignity Council.
Sorry, Jan, I've never heard of it before, which is a shame.
Isn't it?
No, nor have I. Nor have I, Terry. I haven't heard of it. I'm sorry.
Well, there we go. That's the start of the 10, isn't it? Then one good thing is I'm not going to bore with you telling who it is. Okay. So I just need to be able to, there we go, click the slides. I've not got the best, I've only got little tiny screens of, I can't see people's faces, so you'll have to bear with me. If you put your hand up, somebody will have to tell me. Anyway, the Dignity in Care, what is it? It started in 2006 and it was actually launched by the Department of Health. And when they launched it, they brought a group of stakeholders together. And at that particular time, I was working for Skills for Care, and the chief exec said, "Our dignity will do you, Jan. You go and represent us," which I was very happy to do, but not really knowing what I was going in for. And I think that's coming, is that DF? Just go and do it. So I did. And the campaign was launched. But then the Department of Health said, well, you need to be an entity in your own right. So in 2016, we became a charity. You'll see there that the aims of the charity are to preserve and protect the health of not just people who are receiving care, or whether it be in social care, whether it be in acute care, clinical care, or whatever. Our remit really is for every citizen. And dignity in care, it means in any setting, as I'm saying there, but not limited to hospitals, to homes, and whatever else. It really is, as a charity, we had to be very careful and be clear with the objects that we were there to support citizens. I'd just like to stop a sec, because what is dignity? And this is a little bit of a discussion point. So I would ask you, what is dignity? Anybody got any thoughts or ideas what they think that is? How do we define dignity?
Oh, it's Terry. I'll start. If do you know, I've never really thought about how you define it. It's respect, concern for an individual's comfort in a certain situation, and giving them the control, if you like, over what is happening to them in a certain situation. So whether they choose to participate or not. I don't know how to put that into a succinct definition. I could only say, if it's around hospital care, it's dignity is what I want my mum to be treated with.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Terry. Andy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say the same as Terry, really. Dignity, treating, I'd want people to be treated as I would my family. I also think, added to that, treat people with empathy as well. I think that has a big laying into dignity and respect as well.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Did someone have, I did see something in the chat, but what I would say is, while dignity may be difficult to define, what is clear, and we've even had that experience, and of course I've had that experience in the past when someone says quickly, what does that mean? How do you define it? What we do know is when we haven't been treated with dignity and respect. This, just to give you, just so that you can take away and you can have these slides and you can say, oh, look what it means. The dictionary says it's a state, quality or manner worthy of esteem or respect, using those words that you've used yourself. But it is about having self-respect and not being stripped of your self-respect. it's about the things that usually people say to me is about looking at how people are treated, how their privacy is respected. Are they given autonomy, which comes back to what you said, Terry, about their self-control, their control. But what about the self-worth? And what do we do to people when their self-worth is eroded? To treat someone with dignity is being of worth in a way that is respected to them. The RCN actually define it that way, so that we make people feel valued, which goes back to some of the discussions that have been there this afternoon that have said, what about these people? They are patients, but they're very fundamentally, they are people, and they are people that need to be valued. Inherent dignity, and obviously what I would always say importantly is about people's human right to be treated with dignity. And we know freedom, justice will come with peace in the world. So there we've got quite a cross section of people there. But I want to go, and I couldn't wait to get to this, and this is why I was so quiet, because the NMC, the National Medical Council, actually say treat people as individuals, uphold their dignity. To achieve this, you must treat people with these 3 words. And if you take nothing away this afternoon, please take these 3 words: to treat people with kindness, respect and compassion. And it's something that I fundamentally, the next one, is believe in, because when I've worked with young children, I've worked with people who haven't had experiences of perhaps hospital care, any sort of care. When children have said to me, Jan, it's about being kind. And if a child says it's about being kind, we understand kindness. We really do. So why do we have to dress it up in any other words than the words that people will understand? And when we say that, when I think of the word kindness, I think of the way someone is going to work with me, how someone will treat me, but with respect and compassion. And there's number 2, making sure you deliver the fundamentals, not the basics, Terry, the fundamentals of care, and making sure that they're delivered effectively. How important is that? And you know, usually when I've stopped and I've put this slide up and I've spoke to people and I go, okay, what are the fundamentals of care? The number of people that don't really recognise what they are or have different levels of understanding. If you're on a ward, if you're delivering care, if you're anywhere, why don't you get the basics right? Why don't you get the definition of what the fundamentals of care are, so that we can set the standards from there on in? It says avoid making assumptions. We've also heard about people making assumptions, and being recognised that there is diversity, to celebrate diversity and to look at make sure that that person has got some individual choice left to whatever that is, to give them that control, and make sure that any treatment, assistance or care which is being delivered is delivered without undue delay. And, sorry, I've gone over to the next slide. Undue delay, and respect and uphold people's human rights, which I've already spoke, are absolutely fundamental. Those 3 words: kindness, respect and compassion. And you'll see up the top there is our logo for the National Dignity Council. And what that logo says is putting dignity at the heart. And it also says in the heart, minds and actions. So what we want people to do is to think about it, to feel it, but to do something about it. And compassion really means for me that you have to know that individual. And I always find that when I look at that word, it is like dignity, hard to define. But I think when I've put it into practice, when I know that it's working, is because I know what that person knows before they do, because I've built a meaningful relationship. I've given them, you know, we talked about earlier, that nurses would possibly say, doctors would say, people will say, social workers will say, give me more time, but a patient will say, give me time. Stop, think. When was the last time you were not treated with dignity and respect? I think we've heard that this afternoon, maybe some of those examples, but just think about it. What happened? And importantly, how did it make you feel? So how did you behave? And I'm putting that out as a question. But if people want to share that, that's absolutely fine. If you want to share, Carol, you have your hand up. Would you like to share your perspective of that?
Last time it happened when I broke my arm and went to hospital, had it x-rayed, and they said, oh, we don't think it's got a break. And I looked at the x-ray and I said, well, that looks like a break to me. And I, said, I'm only saying that because I used to be a nurse. And the reaction I got from that was actually, well, understandable, I suppose, that, who the hell did I think I was, telling them, reading the x-ray over their shoulder sort of thing. But anyway, when I went back to see the consultant one following day, and he said, you should have had this splinted. And I said, well, I did mention it. And he said, what happened? So I told him, and he was quite annoyed about it. But I said it wasn't so much, it actually wasn't the fact that they hadn't splintered it, because I was, I was able to do that when I got home. But it was the attitude that they knew better than I did. And actually it was my arm and it was hurting, and I knew how I'd fallen on it. And it was this sort of attitude that, yeah, lack of respect, or is it that they thought I didn't respect them? It's interesting. But I was, if I'd been anybody else, I'd have been made to feel as though I wasn't really worth the space I was taking up. And that's not very good.
It isn't, because it affects people's self-esteem, self-worth, and when people are disempowered so that they haven't got the voice left anymore. And that's a great example, really, of where, yes, you tried to speak out, you didn't have control, you weren't listened to. So were you treated with respect and compassion? No.
I think the word the word control is quite an interesting one. I mean, people talk about where's the power in this scenario, where's, who's got the control, and actually it's a great shame that we have to use either of those two words, because at the end of the day it's a situation where somebody needs care and somebody is giving care, and there shouldn't be any worry about who's got the power and the control, because you should be working together. That's a very simplistic view on things, but co-production. What's co-production? Co-production is working together. Let's get back to basics and just say it how it is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then power, there is a misuse of power. And when there is a misuse of power, then somebody is disempowered. But it is looking at that co-productive way of working that has a massive impact, and does actually, those little things make the big difference then, don't they? That changes do occur. What I wanted to speak to you about next, though, was, where does it all start? I would say, oh, we must have it in our veins. We must have it there. We must be able to live and breathe and just do dignity, shall I say. But does it start with children? Are children taught to respect? Yes, there's all sorts of things that children are taught. Of course there are. They have at all ages, they have lessons. But I just wonder, I'll stop a minute and say to you, where did it start for you? Because that's where it started for me. Does anybody recognise what that is?
Oh, yeah. Was it an oak one?
Yeah.
Yours is posh, though. It's got a lid on it.
Yeah. It hadn't got a lid, because the one, I'm just doing some fancy footwork there, aren't I? Trying to work this out. No, when I was about 9 years of age, I was sent with my two sisters, would you believe, on a bus to my grandma's with her dinner wrapped in a tea towel beautifully, and told to go and take her a dinner. And when I got there was a bucket to be emptied. But I was taught to care. I was taught to care for my grandma, and I was taught from that early age, no matter who it was, that we care for others. And if you've got that opportunity, and if you've been brought up with that environment where it is a caring environment, then you know what kindness, compassion and respect is put into practice. But if you've not, then we have problems. Because I would also say, and my experiences are, that all behaviour has meaning. And I've worked in prisons, and when I've worked in prisons, working with prisoners who want to become carers, and they earnestly want to become carers, and they are going to become carers to a certain degree. But when I ask them what dignity means, they haven't been afforded it. Very many of them haven't been afforded that dignity. They haven't been shown how to care. And one gentleman who actually was fantastic at the way that he cared for others, but he'd murdered someone. I say but, I shouldn't say but, it's and. He'd murdered someone, but he knew what he'd done. He knew how he'd done it, but he was brought up, and he was brought up battered, bruised and abused. And therefore you have to remember that sometimes people don't know how to do it, do they? And we all might say, well, it's easy, you know, it's inbred in us, but it isn't. And I think we need to think of that, not just think of that horrible toilet that I'm showing you. So 155,000 people. Now, if you've not heard of it, that goes some way for me to think about as chair. But 155,000 champions are signed up on the Dignity in Care. And, you know, Carol, it's a website, but we do hold activities across the country. And we do hold activities so that people can have an understanding, and it's there to raise awareness. So it isn't just about we're on a website. I will say that because Carol raised that point earlier. But you imagine 155,000 people, and I'm still having to say to people, do you know about dignity? Do you know about putting it into practice, etc.? So what's a champion? We do have the role of a champion, and this is what it is. And it's to stand up and challenge disrespectful behaviour rather than just tolerate it. And oh boy, did I used to did that when I first came. I'm a qualified social worker. I am actually health and wellbeing director at a place for people with visual impairments. And I've worked in care, social care mainly, for a very long time. Although having obviously communicated and worked with people very closely on different standards when I worked for Skills for Care, I worked very closely with Skills for Health on looking at occupational standards, especially for people at end of life. But boy, oh boy, we have a reputation, and I think challenging disrespectful behaviour rather than just tolerate it. If you think about the way that systems are run, the way that processes are run, and the way that services are run, there's a way to do it. It's not just what you do, it's the way that you do it. But we have to make challenges, and we have to make sure that it is against disrespectful and not just condone it. Act as a good role model by treating people with the respect and those who are less able to stand up for them. Speak about dignity, and that's what we ask of people, to actually speak up about it and make sure that people are clear about what it is, but the services are organised and that people use these champions. We expect them to influence and inform their colleagues, but importantly to listen and understand the views and experience as citizens, which goes back to what you said, Carol, again about co-production, but also listening to people as to what do they have to say. And there's already been Terry and Kate alluded to earlier around listening. What difference will this make to this individual or to the people who love them, who maybe might not be able to get access to them? Making sure that dignity and compassion and respect is at the heart of everyday practice. And these can be used as recruitment tools, as criteria to check for people's behaviour. And there is very, very importantly, remember that every single one of us are unique, and that we should be treated as such and not lumped with a label. Promoting independence and quality. And then we have what we call the dignity do's that have been about since the campaign started, and we expect people to adhere to those. So these are the 10 do's. We've got cards with these that are absolutely free, or you can download them, and we have a website that you can get these from, or you can send for them and we'll send them to you. But have zero tolerance of all forms of abuse. And there's all types of abuse, as you will agree with me. There's not just the overt abuse, there's the covert abuse. And in a sense, there's been a lot of discussions about people calling people, introducing themselves and saying who they are. Remembering that people are there to be treated with this respect is to say, who am I? Support people with the same respect and compassion that you'd want for yourself or a member of your family if you know how to do it. Treat a person as an individual by offering a personalised service, listen and allow them to express their wants and needs, and respecting their right to privacy, enabling people to maintain maximum possible levels of independence, choice and control. Ensure people are able to complain without fear of retribution. I rather hate the word complain, because I think it should be to give feedback. Because I think once you've got to the stage where people are complaining, yeah, what have you got in place already that's proactive and gives people an opportunity just to give you feedback? And where is that voice? Because it says engage with your family members and carers, and also how important that's been to everyone's health, well-being and welfare, especially through the pandemic. And assist people to maintain that level of confidence and their self-esteem. And most importantly, again, what has happened over COVID has been the loneliness and isolation. And that's not just about being in the room with someone else, that's about being totally cut off. And I want to ask you, why does this occur then? Because if all those are in place, why does such as this occur? I had an email from a hospital that said to me, Jan, can you come and do a talk for my ward? And I went to speak to them and I said, give me some ideas of what's happening. And one of the issues was expecting a person to urinate in absorbent pads rather than helping them to use the toilet. How would you feel if you were that patient? How also do you think the member of staff would feel who's been asked to do that? Because of what's been already said, it's just as important that staff feel that they're doing a fantastic job and that they feel, oh, well, I can go home and think, yeah, I've done something really good for someone. And what would you do if you heard someone say that? And then the question is, what has to change to ensure that the dignity of the patient is respected? And you may think, well, surely that doesn't happen now, but it does.
Yeah.
Just any comments on that just to begin with?
Well, you know what people will say, and that is that we're so short of staff that we don't, we haven't got the staff to do that. And there's where, to a certain extent, I think the way that wards are staffed needs to be looked at. The way that, the different roles of people on the ward. And it may be that there's a need to have more. I mean, when I did my nurse training, we had ward orderlies, and they knew that they would do certain jobs, but they would muck in and do anything else as well. So I think we've lost that. That the comment earlier was that when you've got healthcare assistants who've been allocated 3 bays to look after, and then somebody in the 4th bay rings the bell and says, I need to go to the loo, and they say, well, it's not my job, you're somebody else's responsibility. I think we've got to kind of look back and think, actually, we need to teach people that, or we need to look at a holistic view and say, I mean, I would be devastated if when my mum was in hospital, if somebody had said to her, oh, here's there's an incontinence pad there, and if you need to go to the loo, you can use that. I mean, even though my mum had dementia, I think she'd have thrown the thing at them if they'd said that to her. So I just think I can't understand how anybody ever thought that it was okay to tell a person that it was fine for them to sit on a wet, soaked pad, because that to me is like, you don't even, even if you wouldn't do that to an animal. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just something that is so abhorrent to me.
And I think I've used it as an example because it would be abhorrent to very many other people too. And the number of people who would say, how could that happen? But it does happen.
Yeah.
And as I said, it had happened on this ward. And my friend who was end of life, she had a, oops, I've got things coming on, like admitting people in. That when my friend was end of life, and she called the call bell in the night, and she got ulcers in her mouth, she wasn't very well at all, and she had urinated in the bed, and they gave her a pad, but they didn't change the bed. And it's those fundamentals that you question. Are you seeing the person? Are you seeing the actual whole situation or part of it? I've just got to get them a pad, or I've got to get the bed sorted. No, it's just one part of it, and it's very sad that that whole situation isn't judged as it is. Any other comments on that?
No, I quite agree. Like, my biggest bugbear at the moment is when I work in orthopedics and patients come in with broken hips and things. They'll be coerced into wearing a pad for their comfort or their security when they come into ED or the admissions ward. And the first question I ask them when I'm doing their assessment is, do you wear pads at home? And I think 95% of them will say no. And
No.
it's like, but they'll start on one ward because I can see where the staff are thinking they're being nice because it means they don't have to move the patient. They've got the reassurance that if they dribble, they're not going to have to get the whole sheet changed. And you can sell it to a patient really easily that this is something that would be beneficial for them. But then they move to another ward and they move to another ward. And by the time it comes to them going home, they're going home with pads and pants and a referral to the continence service because the patient's now incontinent, because you haven't instilled them into actually, this isn't normal practice. You shouldn't be where it takes just as much effort to change a sheet if someone's had an accident than it does to change a pad. And it doesn't actually do anything. And if you've got the wrong type of pad, it doesn't help the skin. So it's actually, I want to just bin them. I want to take them away, lock them away. We've managed it with the old ankle pads, and now they're using it with incontinence pads. And it's like, it's not a safety net for the patient, it's a safety net for the nurse because she thinks it's going to make them feel better. They've done something, and it's actually, no, can we just get rid of it? And it is something that's happening constantly. And I can say, I probably think every day I have to turn around to a member of staff and say, actually, get rid of the pads.
Yeah.
They don't need it. Get rid of the pads. They can use a bottle. We've got feminine urinals that we can use. We've done stuff that we can, there's ways you can manage it that don't need them to be sat in. And the pads that we have in your trust are horrible. They are proper nappy-like things. It's not just a little liner that you can put in a pair of net knickers. This is a proper wraparound nappy. And it's like, actually, these are just degrading.
Yeah.
And there's no dignity to them at all. And it's trying to kind of get that message across that actually this isn't normal practice. This needs to change.
I can hear somebody trying to come in there.
I think it's somebody banging their head against the wall, because, you know, when you think that you're up against a system that has embedded into the nursing staff and the healthcare assistants that it's for the patient's benefit to have these obscene looking pads. And I mean, I know when Mum was in hospital that when she was she had a urine infection, she was really poorly, but she was still able to ring the bell when she needed to go to the loo. And the fact of the matter is that they didn't answer the bell. She would then bang on the wall with her walking stick, which got them quite cross. And they told her to stop doing it. And she said, well, I will if you answer the bell. But the thing is that, you know, there's only so long that you can hang on to your urine. And especially if you've got a urine infection and it's actually, you know, uncomfortable. So on one occasion, she actually tried to get out of bed and fell, because the last thing she wanted to do was to wet the bed. And I was in the room within seconds, because I mean, I can't remember why I'd left the room anyway, because I made a point of saying that I wanted to stay with her. And so, you know, stopped her falling, but she would have fallen, and I took her to the loo, and then I get told off for taking her to the loo. And you sort of think to yourself, what's happened here? That's what I keep asking myself. What happened to the basic principle of treating people like human beings and being respectful of them? Because it has gone in some places. I mean, I'm not saying everywhere, because lots of places have been are absolutely wonderful, but it only takes one or two places for it to be wrong, and that sort of sets a tone for sometimes for other people to think, oh well, if they get away with it, we can as well. And that's a shame.
I couldn't agree more, Carol, because when it's done right and when everyone does respect people as individuals and they are on the same, are committed to promoting dignity, it makes a lot of difference to the ward morale, the patients' experiences, etc. My daughter is actually head of continence in Wolverhampton, so I get all of these situations, as you can well imagine, and the discussions regarding using the correct pads even, because that in itself, if the assessment isn't appropriate and if the assessment isn't done, then the person doesn't get appropriately, then the person doesn't get the right product that they should have to support them, which Donna, you go back to. Why use them? You've lost track of who's this person, what are their fundamental needs, both medically and, might I say, from a dignity perspective. So I'll just move on and go on to that next slide, which says, how do you make sure that dignified practice is the only way to practice? So what do you think then, as people here on this webinar, as I might call it, or Teams, what do you think is good? What have you seen that really has made a difference that you know? And you know what? I know that when I've walked onto a ward myself, I've walked into a care home because I used to be an inspector in care homes, and you can lift it. If you can see it, you can feel it. And I always say, see it. What's the atmosphere? What can you see? And you'll say, you know straight away where it's working well. So give us some examples of where you've seen that there is dignified practice, but why do you think that it's there? Anybody want to give me some examples?
I think a lot of it depends on who the nursing director or the chief nurse is, because eventually Mum was at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, and the chief nurse there was an absolute stickler for dignified practice. And when my mum eventually was dying, she collapsed and was unconscious, and she was unconscious for 3 days in the hospital. And they put themselves, you know, did everything they possibly could to make Mum comfortable, but also to make me comfortable by putting in she was in a side room, and they put in one of these chairs that you can flop the back of it almost flat so that I could actually sleep there at night. And there was just something about the way that I was treated that was just, it made it so much easier, so much more. It made Mum's death so much more dignified. The fact that I was able to be there with her, and the fact that they were kind of looking after me. I know that probably sounds a bit selfish. It's not meant to. It's just that the whole situation was so much better because we were treated as a unit. You know, Mum and daughter should be together at this time, and so that's what happened. Which is why I feel so desperately sorry for people who've got relatives in care homes. I think if Mum had been ever ended up in a care home, I'd have ended up in prison, because they would not have stopped me visiting her. So
I think yes, you've made some extremely valued points, and one of them is about specifically at the end of life and the way that you treat the person, the way that you treat the person themselves, which can be a patient or wherever they are, but also the family members and the closeness, and even what was spoken about earlier, when there are difficult situations, the different techniques that are used, or digital techniques even, that have helped to make some of those connections. But if it's not treated in the way that it should be treated, and I do think it very much, and my experiences again are, who's the leader? Who's leading this? And inspectors will say, who's in charge? And what's the escalation process? And who understands the escalation process, so that if they do want to give feedback, and it is where our 10 do's come into play, if they do want to give feedback, do they know who to give it to? Do they know where to? I was actually an inpatient myself, gallstones, but it went wrong. Overnight I had my gallstones removed, and I had a terrible time. And it wasn't that I wasn't treated. No one told me who they were. No one washed their hands as they should have. And my daughter said, Mom, she phoned me up at 7 o'clock and she said, if anybody walks in one more time and they don't wash their hands, Mom, please do not accept them in the room. So it was that bad. And how dare they, when I was watching for everything they were doing. But you know what? I didn't have a voice. I
No.
was vulnerable. I was the vulnerable person that needed the service. Hadn't got the voice, I hadn't got the strength. And like many, many people will say, and I'm not going to say I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, but I certainly was saying, I want to go. Just as soon as I'm free, as soon as I can, I want to go. And that's what you get, and that's why it's important. But what I did do was I went back and I did give them feedback, and I used every one of those 10 do's to give them the feedback on where one particular nurse who was absolutely wonderful, she told me who she was, and she came in on the second day, she washed her hands and she spoke to me and she talked me through every single step that she was taking, everything that she was doing, why she was doing it. And when I was sick, she said it was to be expected. She reassured me. She showed compassion. But when it wasn't in the other places, do you know what, though? What it did was, I was able to use the 10 do's, but what it did, that quality manager that I spoke to afterwards said to me, Jan, I'm so glad you've given us that feedback, because we now have some ammunition from what we suspected to be able to do something about. So whilst it's not about being a snitch, it's about actually making a difference to practice. And if I'm a true dignity champion, I'm standing up to challenge what I would say and experience disrespectful practice. But what I would say to you is, don't expect people to give you the feedback when they're in vulnerable situations. So if we haven't got any more examples of when you might have thought, oh, that's really good and that's really worked from that perspective, I'll put these standards up for you. These are some standards.
Can I just
Sorry.
add more? I just remembered this. My mum had, because she was on fluid tablets, and what she had fluid retention at one stage, and so her feet were quite painful. And the nurse who was the lead for dementia, I'd been working with them at the Royal Berk, so she knew me. She popped up to see me and to see Mum. And when she asked Mum how she was, and Mum said, well, my feet hurt, Karen went out of she said, I'll be back in a minute. She came back in with a waterproof, with a bowl of water, and she knelt down and she washed my mum's feet and then rubbed cream into them.
Beautiful.
I was absolutely, I could have burst into tears. It was so touching.
Yeah.
And
sorry, Carol.
Something else that, you know, that was over and above the call of duty, if you like.
Little things that make a big difference, isn't it? And it's those little things that really, just washing someone's feet. And if you said, oh, she washed my feet, it's nothing to do with the washing of the feet. It's the act. It's going that extra mile. And it's like Terry spoke about earlier when she said about the ice pops to help someone, or when someone found something to put the walking sticks in. You know, it's going that extra mile. It's not accepting what's in front, thinking what difference can you make to that person's life. Thank you for that, Carol. And so these are 8 standards that have been put together, and they've been put together by Chesterfield Royal, NHS UK. And I feel that is just something extra to take away. Honesty. Well, we've got duty of candour and we've got responsibilities, but are we openly honest? Are we honest with ourselves? Are we honest enough to be able to give the feedback when it's due and to be able to work as we should? And when mistakes are happening, not to have that blame culture, but have that learning culture where I always say, what are lessons learned? What goes in the lessons learned log? And what can we learn from this? Yes, kindness, compassion, but courtesy, respect, obviously, understanding, and not forgetting confidentiality. And then the privacy, but the one big thing that when everything falls down, it falls down due to lack of effective communication. So we've got a poster, and you can download this poster. And what I say to people, are you prepared? And is your ward, is your hospital, is anywhere where you go, is it prepared to, whoever is asked this question, how will they answer it? So promoting dignity with the National Dignity Council, this poster says, ask me how dignity is promoted here, and ask the people that you work with, ask yourself, could you answer that question? Because if I was a carer, Well, I've asked these questions when I've been out there as an inspector, and I've been out there asking those questions. Or if I'm a carer, when my mum was in a care home, and I would ask this question. I'd want to know before, when I'm vetting the home, before I take anyone in there. So finally, I'm going to end with a mirror, because where does it all start? And where does it all end? It ends with you. Looking in the mirror, and the mirror looks back, and the mirror tells us what we need to, who we need to be, and what we need to do. Too often we underestimate the power of touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, and an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have a potential to turn life around. I think it's an excellent statement, and it is something that not only do we have to afford patients, people who use services, what about our colleagues? They too deserve to be treated with dignity, with kindness, respect, and compassion. So be somebody who makes everybody feel like a somebody, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I just want to say what a really, really fitting end, actually, because it's given me so much to think about and reflect on. Especially, you just totally nailed it. The mirror, the final slide, the mirror, and it all start. And I think this is a huge opportunity now for. I've got my playlist that Ignar has done for us for my kind of reflective thinking, relaxing, and I'm actually going to think about this because it's dignity starts and ends with me. And so I've got a lot to take on board, and I need to check out the website. So thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Question, but I think this has been an absolutely superb day, and all credit to you, Terry, and the rest of the crew for putting it on. It's been really good and very valuable, very enlightening, very inspiring, but very enjoyable. So thank you.
Well, it's absolutely not my hard work. It's the hard work of Donna and Matthew and all the Fab ambassadors who've worked and collaborated to organise and run these tents. I've just had the pleasure of trying to build it into a website so people can get to see it. But actually, the hard work, the passion, and the ideas are theirs. So all credit to our Fab ambassadors, actually.
Fabulous team. You can all go home and feel really, really pleased with yourselves. You know, go home and pat yourselves on the back tonight. You deserve it.
And despite what is amazing to me, listening to all of you, in what has been the most challenging of 18 months, and you still have the drive and the passion to reflect, to make a difference, and that's just awesome. So I'm in awe. So thank you.
I think the one thing to take away from this is that we've actually highlighted some of the things in the NHS that aren't terribly good, but they probably only comprise, less than 5% of what happens every day. With people doing their utmost to make sure that things are right for patients. So,
yeah,
I see that Rachel has joined us, Rachel Jury, who's a very good friend of mine. So, hi, Rachel. But yeah, I think it's been a very good day. So, thank you.
Yes, I think Rachel's nearly broken Twitter again. She does it every year on Change Day. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, but also to thank you all for the permission to record this day, because we will edit it, we will make it into a box set, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people will have the opportunity to catch up and watch this over the next few months. So we'll amplify the messages even further. So thank you for allowing us to do that.